In the days of his youth, Cuchulainn went to Scotland to train under the famous warrior Queen Scar. During the time of his training, he helped his teacher to defeat her twin sister, the warrior Queen Aoife. He showed mercy to Aoife and spared her life, but under one condition, that she would bear him a son. And so, the two warriors became lovers, and Aoife fell pregnant with Cuchulainn's son. But before the boy was even born, Cuchulainn had to return to Ulster and left Aoife behind, giving her a golden ring. Aoife was to send the son to him as soon as he was old enough to wear the ring without it falling from his fingers. Time went by, and Cuchulainn lived through a lot of battles and adventures, while his son grew up under the love of Aoife. She trained him in all the arts of a warrior, which Cuchulainn too had learned during his time in Scotland. 8 years after Cuchulainn had left Aoife to go back to Ulster and to marry Emer, Conla was finally old enough that he was able to wear Cuchulainn's golden ring on his thumb without losing it. At this point, he was strong and brave and a skilled warrior, despite his young age, just as Cuchulainn once was. But what neither Conla nor Cuchulainn knew was that Aoife had heard of the marriage of Cuchulainn with Emer, and she was furious to say the least. She hated Cuchulainn for betraying her like this, and her wrath didn't cool down with time. She decided to use her son to get her revenge on the man she had once loved. She gave the ring to Conla, and for the first time in his life told him about his father and what the ring meant. But she was careful not to tell him about her feelings towards his father. Instead, she used the excitement of her son upon the prospect of meeting his father to put 3 geisa on him, 3 bounds he couldn't break. For once, Conla was never to turn his back on his journey once he had started, until he reached his father. Secondly, he should never refuse a fight. And lastly, he was never to tell anyone his name. And without even questioning his mother, Conla set off to find his father. He boarded a boat headed for Ireland, and it wasn't until long that the green shores of Ireland came into sight. Conla's heart jumped out of excitement. When a ship came into sight, the men of Croaggne, the king of Ulster and uncle to Cuchulainn, saw him arriving. They saw a young boy in fine armor and with the weapons and shield of a warrior. Croagh, who was given an eyewitness report, immediately sent a messenger to find out who the young warrior was and whether he was friend or foe. But when the messenger confronted Conla, the young boy, bound by the gaze, refused to identify himself. The messenger explained again that it was the king of Ulster himself who wished to know his name and intentions, and that he had to answer by law. But still, the boy did not say a word. The messenger rushed back to King Croagh to tell him what happened, and the king grew angry. This was an insult to the king, and couldn't go unpunished. He asked his men whether any one of them would be willing to defend their king's honor, and without thinking twice, Conall Cernach rose and declared he would fight the insolent boy and make him pay. When Conall reached Conla, the boy stated that there was no need for a fight, since he wasn't here to cause trouble, but that he wouldn't refuse a fight if Conall insisted. In any way, he wouldn't speak his name. And that was all Conall needed to hear. The fight started, and to the amazement of every single bystander, the boy stand victorious over the great warrior of Ulster. Upon hearing what happened, Croagh was determined to set an end to this humiliation and sent for his best warrior, Cuchulainn, to teach the boy a lesson. Cuchulainn came and faced his son, not recognizing him, but thinking of him as a stranger and intruder. And since Conla still not spoke his name, there was no way for Cuchulainn to identify this boy in any way. Cuchulainn was impressed by the boy, who, by the way, had been victorious over his old comrade Connla, and so he gave him one more chance to speak his name. But the boy refused. Cuchulainn stated that he didn't leave him a choice but to challenge him to a battle. And since this was another gaze of Conla, he accepted. And so, even though neither of them really wanted to fight, a fight arose. On the one side, for a gaze that couldn't be broken. On the other, for the honor of a king that had to be defended. The fight was a fight like no other. Both seemed to be a match for each other, similar in strength and skill. It wasn't until long when Conla recognized his father in the man he fought. But even though he was desperate to reveal his identity to him, the gaze made him shut his mouth and fight. Cuchulainn, on the other hand, didn't have a fight like this in a long time. This boy was more skilled than most adult warriors in Ireland. Since Conla had the same training as Cuchulainn and had the advantage of his youth, he was able to counter every attack Cuchulainn tried, and even managed to land a few hits himself. But prompted by those hits, Cuchulainn grew angrier and angrier, until his battle fury triggered his berserker mode and made him turn into a distorted monster. Now, there was no doubt in Conla anymore about who this man was. And though both men took up their spears, and Conla had his first, he deliberately missed his shot, for he didn't want to kill his father. The gaze made him fight, but did not force him to kill. But Cuchulainn, in his rage, and not knowing who the boy was, grabbed his gay bollock, the spear that didn't miss and was more deadly than any other. He swung it and did not miss. Upon hitting Conla, the gay bollock splintered in his body, causing agony for the boy and mortally wounding him. It was in that moment that Cuchulainn spotted the ring on Conla's thumb, and his heart sank. He now knew who the boy was, and ran to his son and took him into his arms. Since Cuchulainn now knew his identity, Conla was finally free to speak and told Cuchulainn what had happened. The Hound of Ulster took his son into his arms and ordered the men of the Red Branch to come forward, for this was his only son, and they should introduce themselves to him. And while Conla lay dying, every single Ulster warrior went up to him, introduced themselves, and welcomed him as a part of the Red Branch warriors of Ulster. And when the last of them had introduced themselves, and there was nothing more to say, Cuchulainn drew his sword and slit his son's throat, so that he had a quick death and wouldn't suffer any longer. All the warriors grieved, but none more than Cuchulainn, who was devastated that his only son had to die by his own hand, so that he couldn't even take revenge on the man who killed him. He cradled his boy in his arms and sang a lament. But since he was still in his berserker mode, the warriors and the king were worried he would turn on them, and so they called for the druid Carvat. The druid was quick to put a spell on Cuchulainn, forcing him to fight the waves of the ocean, and so he did, until he passed out of exhaustion, turning back to his normal self. Word got back to Aoife about what happened, and it was only then she realized what she had done. Now she had lost Cuchulainn and her son Conla. She grieved and wept, and would do so until the end of her life. For her vengeance had cost her everything, and she would never see either of them again. And that was the story of Cuchulainn's son and Aoife's revenge. If you like the video, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when the next episode comes out. See you next time. Slán slán!